today on Ag News Daily.
Despite all the noise in the marketplace about trade and some uncertainty and some changes, demand continues to be very good. In fact, record-breaking in some of these markets.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. Combine's in the shed.
Good, you guys are done.
We got done, absolutely. And then there was some weather this week, but now we're going to watch some fronts move in. Bitter cold dominated the central and eastern part of the U.S. this week, and now we're seeing some of those warmer temperatures, some in the 60s and 70s. Those are expected to return to parts of the plains and in the Midwest through this weekend. Forecasters, though, are saying this will be a back-and-forth pattern that will likely continue through November. There is a stronger shot of Canadian cold air that will settle late November into early December. But some of the recent light rain and snow has helped improve topsoil moisture in the northern areas. The weekend storm system moving in early next week could also bring some more much-needed precipitation into the Midwest. While the rain may help ease drought conditions, we still have low Mississippi River levels. Meteorologists say the major improvement isn't expected this month, but a wetter setup heading into the winter could offer some more long-term relief.
So that means a wetter winter, which means more snow.
For us.
Yeah. Not my favorite piece of news, but the USDA's crop progress report was not released earlier this week for the sixth straight week due to the government shutdown, which we'll talk about later. But with the government being reopened now, it's expected to see a crop progress report next Monday. According to private estimates from a Reuters survey of 9 analysts, the U.S. corn harvest is about 92% complete, 96% complete for soybeans as of Sunday. Both figures are in line with last year's pace and just slightly ahead of the 5-year average. For winter wheat, planting is nearly complete at an estimated 95%, with about 52% of that crop rated good to excellent, so a pretty timely harvest all in all.
Yes, certainly on pace. What was Veterans Day this week? There's a lot of news and agriculture-related updates in today's episode, but we wanted to start with some positive news here around it being Veterans Day. The American Farm Bureau has named retired Army Command Sergeant Major Matthew Rudder of South Carolina as the second ever winner of the Veteran Farmer Award of Excellence. Rudder served 22 years in the Army and now helps fellow veterans find purpose through agriculture. He co-founded the Project Victory Gardens, a nonprofit that helps veterans transition into civilian life by teaching them hands-on farming skills. Rudder also created Farmer Boot Camp, a nationally recognized program that has trained nearly 300 veterans, with about 75% still being involved in agriculture today. He also serves as the founding president of the South Carolina Farmer Veteran Coalition. AFBF President Zippy Duvall says the organization is proud to recognize Rudder for his leadership, service, and commitment to both country and community. Rudder plans to use part of the $10,000 award, sponsored by Farm Credit, to launch a coffee and chores program that will connect veterans across South Carolina through farm-based learning and support. Looks like a much-deserved award there.
What a fun name, Coffee and Chores. I'm excited to see how that comes together. Maybe we'll have to have him on the podcast sometime.
That'd be a great idea.
Well, after 41 days of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, Congress has passed the vote to reopen the federal government. The House passed a continuing resolution 222 to 209 votes on Wednesday evening following Senate approval earlier this week. The bill provides funding for most federal agencies now through January 30th of 2026 and fully funds the USDA through the end of fiscal year 2026. It also funds the SNAP program, which has been in limbo since the beginning of November. Agriculture groups across the country welcomed the news, saying the shutdown delayed critical USDA services like farm loans, conservation programs, and, of course, market data. Farm organizations, including the National Corn Growers Association, Wheat Growers, National Farmers Union, and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, urged Congress to now turn its attention to long-term issues, including completing a farm bill, passing year-round E15 legislation, and restoring stability to farm programs. Lawmakers say reopening USDA operations is key to resuming research, technical assistance, and commodity payments that farmers depend on. The bill also extends the 2018 Farm Bill passed through September of 2026 allocating $30 billion annually to the Commodity Credit Corporation, and directs new funding to track foreign-owned farmland, expand conservation assistance, and support animal disease traceability. While the bill funds rural development and agriculture research, it removes support for several Biden-era climate priorities and tightens rules on hemp products. Agriculture leaders say reopening the government is a critical first step, but long-term certainty depends on finishing a new farm bill and meeting today's challenges of the volatile economy that we find ourselves in, Tanner.
Yeah, it was fascinating, the number of listeners that came across what was not working when the government was shut down. Well, we also saw the National Hemp Association saying that new language in the Senate-passed agriculture funding bill will rewrite key hemp provisions from the 2018 Farm Bill. Chairman Jeff Whaling says the measure would end the largely unregulated sale of hemp-derived cannabinoid products and refocus in the industry on hemp grain and fiber production. He says the bill closes the loophole that has allowed some manufacturers to create THC-containing products that are technically considered federally legal because they meet the USDA's definition of hemp. The legislation would override 23 state laws and sharply limit the allowable THC and cannabinoid levels taken in effect after becoming law. Whaling also said that one-year window gives businesses time to adjust and rebuild legitimate regulated hemp market under the proper FDA oversight. But not everyone is on board. Opponents are arguing the new limits are too restrictive and could wipe out a $28 billion industry. Illinois Hemp Growers Association President Rachel Berry told Brownfield the change devastates the hemp industry, particularly small producers, and prioritizes special interests over innovation and family farms. We also saw coming out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they announced just Thursday a step in the fight on New World screwworm with an opening of a new sterile fly dispersal facility in Tampico, Mexico. The facility will allow USDA to release sterile flies by air across northeastern Mexico, including Nuevo Leon. Secretary Rollins said stopping the spread of the screwworm still remains a top priority and highlighted the recent coordination with the Mexican officials to strengthen joint response efforts. Now, the USDA currently disperses about 100 million sterile flies per week in Mexico, and until now, aerial operations were limited due to the southern regions requiring ground release in the north. The agency is also investing $21 million to renovate a fruit fly facility in Metapa, Mexico, which will double the production capacity and is expected to be in operation by the summer of 26. This will bolster the U.S. defense. It is constructing the sterile fly facility to be based in Edinburgh, Texas, to begin operations also in 2026. That production in that facility of South Texas will have a goal of producing up to 300 million sterile flies per week to protect farmers and livestock and to support American ranchers from the USDA.
I love that you get all the hard pronunciation.
And numbers.
I get to take an easy story on the dairy side this week. Secretary Rollins highlighted the Trump administration's new milk action plan during the National Milk Producers Federation's annual meeting, pledging stronger support for America's dairy farmers. Secretary Rollins said USDA's top priority includes increasing dairy demand through updates to the dietary guidelines for Americans, reducing input costs, and expanding milk processing and export opportunities. She also emphasized the need for farm labor reform, saying USDA will work with the Department of Labor and Homeland Security to address the dairy industry's unique workforce challenges.
Man, I hope my next one was as easy as yours was. We did see that beef was in the news. President Donald Trump is calling on the Department of Justice to investigate potential anti-competitive practices in the U.S. meatpacking industry, saying an action is needed to protect both consumers and ranchers. In a post on Truth Social last Friday, President Trump accused majority foreign-owned meatpackers of inflating prices and threatening America's food security. He described the recent drop in cattle prices alongside higher boxed beef prices as fishy and said his administration would not allow corporations to criminally profit at the expense of the American people. Four major companies, JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef, control about 85% of the U.S. beef processing capacity. The announcement drew mixed reactions from the cattle industry. RCAF USA CEO Bill welcomed the move, said this is a growing gap between cattle and beef practices, showing a clear market failure. Meat Institute President Julie countered that beef processors have actually been operating at a loss due to record high cattle prices and tight supplies with strong demand. She added that the industry is highly regulated, the market transactions are transparent, and the USDA data shows losses expected to continue into 2026. But meanwhile, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is pushing Congress to pass the Direct Act, which would expand direct-to-consumer beef sales across state lines. NCBA President Buck Werbine says the measure would provide more opportunities for independent cattle producers while maintaining food safety through traceability requirements. The beef industry leaders say reopening a fact-based discussion on pricing and market structure will be critical for both producers and consumers moving forward.
Well, we certainly have some more news moving on the U.S.-China front as U.S. soybean exports to China appear now to have stalled after just 2 weeks of wide-ranging trade truces between the world's two largest economies. Traders report that the new shipments of American soybeans have yet to materialize following a flurry of orders back in October, creating yet more uncertainty over whether China will return to the market at the levels the White House has expected. Analysts caution that China's commitment to purchase 12 million tons of U.S. soybeans this year may be more of a diplomatic gesture than a firm agreement. Meanwhile, Chinese buyers have made modest purchases of U.S. wheat and sorghum as Beijing rolls back some of their retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural products. As of November 10th, through a 13% duty on though a 13% duty on soybeans remain, keeping them less competitive, of course, than our Brazilian counterpart. The trade framework has already triggered some market optimism as U.S. soybean futures reached their highest levels since June of 2024 amid hopes of renewed Chinese demand. University of Minnesota economist Ed Usett says the tariff changes, along with strong domestic crush demand, improve the price outlook for soybeans and could encourage increased planting for 2026. He also notes that basis levels are responding very favorably and recent price rallies reflect a more positive outlook for growers. Negotiators continue to work out the details of the deal, including the exact purchase commitments, before a formalized agreement is pushed forward, Tanner. So more news, but more yet to come.
Well, yeah, you talked about China buying sorghum. The first shipment of U.S. sorghum is now on its way to China as we speak, marking this major milestone after those month-long stalled trade talks. The renewed flow comes after that recent trade announcement that suspended those retaliatory tariffs and reopened those key channels for American farm commodities. The National Sorghum Producers Chair, Amy France, says the organization is pushing for a minimum purchase agreement of 5 million metric tons, the historic average for U.S. sorghum exports to China, to prove that this is a stable foundation for future trade. France also said the timely rains across parts of the Central Plains have helped boost the crop, with yields expected to rise 23% across the sorghum belt. The larger-than-expected harvest has created storage challenges for some farmers, but exports to China could help relieve that pressure and support that market. Ag Secretary Brooke Rollins announced the first shipment last week on Thursday, signaling that renewed optimism that you talked about, Delaney, for U.S. sorghum producers.
Well, Tanner, we're going to talk fertilizer next week with Josh Linville in person at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Annuals Convention. But fertilizer demand is picking up earlier than usual this fall, as soil temperatures have remained favorable. While nitrogen prices have seen only modest increase, phosphate prices are climbing more sharply, which could lead some farmers to delay applications until spring. At the same time, a nationwide effort is underway to modernize fertilizer recommendations through the Fertilizer Recommendation Support Tool, otherwise known as FIRST, with no I. Developed by scientists from more than 40 states, the tool pools data from over 3,000 research trials to give farmers and crop consultants accurate, science-based guidance on phosphorus and potassium with sulfur planned for 2026. So a unique tool there for growers.
That's right, a first for first. Farmers are adopting cover crops. They tend to fluctuate. Not every conservation practice is continued long term. Data from the last 5 years of the Ag Economy Barometer survey showed a trend that in cover crop use across U.S. farms, the recently analyzed over this month. From 2021 to 25, the percentage of farmers that are reporting active cover crops ranged from 52 to 57%, averaging at 53. In September of 25, another 21% of respondents said that they had planted cover crops in the past but no longer use them in their operations. Among current cover crop users, the average length of time planting cover crops is 10.5 years, though about 72% have been doing so for 10 or less years. Meanwhile, 26% of the respondents have never, ever planted cover crops, highlighting that there is still room for growth and adoption across U.S. farmland acres. Another article with more numbers.
Those are really surprising numbers to me, too, because I think we look around here in Iowa and so many growers use cover crops. That is not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the United Nations has declared 2026 the International Year of the Woman Farmer, highlighting the vital role women play in global food production and food security, and many farm groups are sharing their plans on how to celebrate. Women are responsible for roughly half of the world's food production, yet often go unrecognized in other countries for their contributions across agri-food systems from production to trade. In the U.S., organizations like the American Farm Bureau Women's Leadership Committee are marking the year with programming to support and empower women in agriculture. Pennsylvania farmer Lisa Worry says key goals include recognizing contributions, removing barriers, promoting economic growth, and improving access to education, markets, and resources for women in the sector. One initiative is the Women in Ag Survey, which is open to women 18 and older across the U.S. and Puerto Rico with ties to agriculture, including production, agribusiness, education, and advocacy. The survey will explore leadership, industry involvement, and barriers to participation, providing actionable insight to strengthen support systems. You can learn more and participate in that survey. Not you, Tanner, but our women in our audience can participate at womeninagsurvey.com.
The U.S. Meat Export Federation remains focused on expanding export demand with a strong emphasis on free trade agreements. Our own Michelle Stangler interviewed Dan Halstrom, who is the president and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation, a nonprofit organization focused on increasing global demand for U.S. beef, pork, and lamb. So let's jump into that interview right now.
Well, there's certainly no shortage of trade news. I'm here joined with the U.S. Meat Export Federation CEO. Dan, tell us about who you are and who is your organization.
Yeah, I'm Dan Halstrom, President and CEO of U.S. Meat Export Federation. We are a trade association based in Denver, Colorado, but we have offices all over the world in 20 different locations with boots on the ground each and every day, marketing U.S. beef, pork, and lamb.
Tell us a little bit about the landscape of exports as we continue into Q4 here.
Yeah, we have data because of the government shutdown, which just ended. We only have data on exports through July. We'll have August and September soon, but through July, despite all the noise in the marketplace about trade, and some uncertainty and some changes, demand continues to be very good. In fact, record breaking in some of these markets. And we're looking at if you look at the pork side, we're down about 4%. But if you take China out, it's virtually steady with a year ago. And on the beef side, we're down at about 8%. Once again, most of that 8% is China. So the rest of the world is performing very, very well. And so we're very excited about that. The fact that demand, if demand were subpar, I'd be concerned, but it's quite the opposite in a lot of countries, a lot of different regions, highlighting places like Korea, Central America, Mexico. Demand is really booming in all those spots.
Tell us about the China negotiations. What has that looked like these past few weeks for you all?
I think, while the recent information provided some good information as it relates to beef and pork, it was limited. I mean, we did see inbound tariffs of U.S. beef and pork drop by 10%. We went from 57% on pork into China to 47%, but it's still higher than we were a year ago at this time at 37%. So while it's better news, it's still not ideal. On the beef side, we went from 32% duties into China down to 22. But once again, still not ideal. But really, on the beef side, we have a much bigger issue that still is unresolved, and that's that all of the U.S. beef plants are currently not registered or not listed for China. So that is the single biggest opportunity facing the beef industry right now on getting these plants relisted and approved back into China. Yeah, so that still remains high of the list, but has not been resolved with these latest talks.
And tell us about that issue to our listeners who might not be familiar and watching it these past few months. What is it, and how is it really being detrimental?
The issue is, the phase one agreement in 2020 on China that was approved was really a home run, especially for the beef industry. We went from, roughly $100 million a year in exports to $1.6 billion in 2024. Demand, while the economy and the average consumer in China is very sluggish, the demand for the very high quality U.S. beef was still pretty strong, right? So what has happened is that through the agreed upon process with the phase one agreement, that plants, if you're approved in the FSIS library, plants are automatically approved for China, and that was due to be renewed every 5 years. Well, 2025 was 5 years, and between February and April, as different plants came due, it became obvious that this was being held as a political tool for the Chinese side, and none of the plants were reapproved. So that's one headwind. The second headwind, which maybe isn't as well known, is that there's been several plants that have also been delisted for non-tariff trade issues. MGA residues in particular. It's obviously a non-scientific barrier. So while it sounds silly, but some of these plants are actually delisted twice, once for the residue violation and once for the registration situation. So it's very complex. It's very much down in the weeds, but something that USTR is very well aware of and high on their list to try to prioritize with the Chinese side.
What are some of those other countries where there's some opportunity for growth for meat exports?
Yeah, that's been our main theme here at our conference this week, has been the demand side. And I'll tell you, it's simple. There's two buckets. One is those countries that have existing FTAs with us. They're all booming. USMCA, Mexico and Canada, the NAFTA 2.0 is one big focus. In fact, we had a whole session on it this morning on the review process next year for the agreement itself. About 27.5% of our exports go to Canada and Mexico if you add up beef, pork, and lamb. So very, very key region of the world. Other agreements, CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement. You've got Colombian Free Trade Agreement. You've got the Chilean and Peruvian Free Trade Agreement. And there's a few others that are maybe a bit smaller. So that's one. Chorus, Korea. I almost forgot one of the big ones. Chorus in Korea, also doing very, very well. So on point one, that is, let's protect and continue to grow existing FTAs. The second bucket is what the industry, the administration's been working on, are the reciprocal agreements, which are a lot of the most recent announcements, right? So you've got Malaysia, Indonesia, the UK, you've got Cambodia, Vietnam that have been recently announced. So you add up all of those, and you have $600 or $700 million, $100 million on the beef side, and maybe $300 or $400 million on the pork side, if you were to get perfect access, right? So the announcements, though, have been primarily around the tariff advantages. So the one area that did have an announcement with some detail was the UK. We do have a 13,000 metric ton zero duty quota in the UK on U.S. beef, which is great news. But a lot of the other announcements have been frameworks, and details are still forthcoming.
I know you mentioned it briefly. It's been probably a hectic past few days for you at the strategic conference that you all are having. Tell us a little bit about some of those takeaways that you've already taken so far from your conference.
Yeah, I think we have two of these a year, right? And this is a excellent opportunity to get all 9 sectors of our membership together in one place, right? So you have the production side, pork producers, lamb producers, cattle producers. You have the feed grain side. You have the inputs, right? The soybean and corn farmers are here, and then of course you have our exporters, and the exporters. Whether they're packers or trading companies, are also well represented here. And then the last bucket is our agribusiness companies. PIC Genetics is here, and you've got people like Eli Lilly, Elanco here, the support groups for agribusiness. So you have the whole farm to fork chain here. And we can talk about what we already have been, demand a lot, but we also are talking about some of the opportunities for easier and more readily accessible market access issues that have to be resolved. So having everyone in the room, everyone discussing the pros and cons of a certain strategy or another strategy is really key. And this is an opportunity for us to do it over the course of our 3-day meeting.
Wow, it just sounds like it's action packed. I can only imagine the ideas for 2026. What are you looking at with your organization of hoping to grow demand? What are some of those priorities as you look into 2026 demand?
Yeah, I think protect what we have, and once again, back to the FTA countries, but then grow the emerging regions. There's regions of the world that, for one reason or another, maybe it's access, maybe it's policy, maybe it's just the general economics. There's a lot of opportunity out there. And I'm looking specifically at places like Central America, where we do have a free trade agreement, but there's a large opportunity to continue to grow that area. Another part of the world is the ASEAN region, which is Southeast Asia. Markets like the Philippines, markets like Indonesia, Malaysia. Indonesia is a huge opportunity for U.S. beef. And Malaysia, while an opportunity for beef as well, is also a large pork opportunity. And then, of course, you're looking at regions like Central Africa, West Africa. It's already an established market for variety meats like beef liver, beef kidneys. But that high end, it's a two-pronged approach in some of these African countries where you have the very low end cost, very high nutritional value in a beef liver, for example, but the cost is very reasonable. But then you also have a high end for white tablecloth restaurants. And we're starting to see every month, every year that goes by, our penetration with U.S. products continues to increase in that region of the world.
Well, thanks for joining us here today. Anything else that you want our listeners to know?
Well, especially for your producer listeners, we have some of the safest and highest quality, best tasting, unique product in the world. And, the real, especially on the beef side, but pork as well, the fact that we have these high grading animals, grain-fed animals that really make us unique in the world, it really makes our job quite a bit easier. So thank you to the listeners that are part of the production chain.
Well, thank you, Dan, for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for that interview. Great conversation. So for this week's Fertilizer Update, Fertilizer Institute is applauding the U.S. Geological Survey, updating its critical minerals list. Now includes phosphate and potash, key nutrients for crop production. TFI President Corey says the designation supports the American farmer to strengthen food security and will highlight supply risks, since most phosphate and potash comes from only a handful of countries, including China, Russia, and Belarus. Delaney, what are we now seeing on the grain market side of things?
Well, we finally had a WASDE report this week after no report in October. The government reopened just in time to release that November WASDE report here on November 14th. Farmers and traders are bracing for that market volatility, as the report will provide some updated yield production and export data for corn and soybeans for the first time in over a month. And just as a note, we are recording this episode before that report comes out, so we'll get to talk about it next week on the show. Commodity experts say the combination, though, of disappointing yields, slowed soybean exports, especially to China, and changing corn export demand could create sharp market reaction. Some analysts are even going as far to say corn and soybean yield projections are expected to decline And the missing October report makes the November report especially influential. So farmers are being advised to manage risk heading into this report. Going to likely be a lot of volatility, but make sure to leave room for the upside as well. Government news and in CONAB specifically here, the monthly report provided some short covering development opportunities with soybeans leading the way here. We're seeing a bump in corn movement as well as the final stages of U.S. harvest are wrapping up. And that is taking place as a lot of on-farm storage also fills as well. Lastly, cattle contracts are under pressure this week from heavier slaughter weights, but all in all, still pretty strong cattle markets we're seeing this week as well.
Yeah, I had a couple of conversations with some listeners, one in Kansas and one in North Dakota, that was discussing the feeder cattle prices at the sale barn. Seems to have no ceiling or no limits. When somebody wants to buy, that number gets really high. But listeners, we always appreciate you for joining in with us too. It'll be great to get you some updates on a WASDE report next week. So make sure you tune in for that. We'll get you in depth as well as a fertilizer update. So big things coming next week. Follow us on our social media platforms. We really appreciate that. But Delaney, for today, what do you say? Should we let the listeners go?
Let's let them go.